Welcome to EconWorks. We live in an era of massive platforms, global supply chains, and unprecedented market concentration. But behind every headline about a merger or a legal settlement, there is a deeper mechanical struggle for control. On this show, we pull back the curtain on the invisible forces shaping our economy. We look past the talking points to examine where law, power, and markets actually collide, and how those collisions redefine the world we live in. Coming to you from the EconWorks desk, we're diving into a breakdown of the systems that run our modern life. This is EconWorks. Today's episode, Gatekeeping the Ecosystem.
Take a look at the device you're probably holding in your hand right now, or maybe one sitting right next to you on the desk. Your smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a tool that belongs entirely to you.
Right.
A completely open window to the digital world where you can just download anything, do anything, connect with anyone.
Yeah, that's definitely the illusion.
Exactly, the illusion. Because behind that smooth glass screen, there's this entire invisible architecture of rules and tolls and governance that's dictating exactly what you are allowed to experience. So, welcome to this deep dive. We tailored this specifically for you, the learner. We know you're constantly looking for the hidden mechanics behind everyday things, and today we're taking a massive shortcut to understanding the invisible forces shaping your digital life.
It really is remarkably easy to just, tap an app icon and completely ignore the incredibly complex ecosystem that allowed that software to get to your screen in the first place. I mean, the mechanics of how that happens, and honestly, more importantly, who controls how that happens, it's arguably one of the most vital economic debates happening in tech right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to guide us through this today, we're pulling from a really insightful source.
Yeah.
We're looking at an analysis from EconWorks.
Right, their antitrust series.
Yep. Specifically, it's titled Editing Gatekeeping the Ecosystem. Yeah, and this is episode 2 of their FAAing antitrust series. And it focuses squarely on Apple. So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how Apple's App Store policies govern competition, how they control developer access, and ultimately how all of this shapes what you, the user, experience every single time you unlock your iPhone.
Which is a lot to cover.
It's a ton. So, okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin to dissect an ecosystem that has billions of moving parts?
Well, I think we have to start at the absolute beginning of the pipeline, right? To understand the ecosystem, we first have to look at the point of entry.
Okay.
The fundamental premise that's laid out in the EconWorks piece is that Apple operates the sole authorized method through which third-party developers can distribute native apps on iOS devices.
Right.
So if a developer wants their native app on an iPhone, they have exactly one door they can walk through.
One door. There's no back door, there's no side window, no alternative alleyway. It's literally the App Store or nothing.
Exactly.
And, reading through the source material, this specific analogy kept coming to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Apple isn't just a competitor in a digital marketplace. They're essentially this strict bouncer at an incredibly exclusive club.
Oh, I like that.
Right. They're the ones standing behind the velvet rope. They decide who gets in.
Mm-hmm.
They dictate what the dress code is. They tell you what kind of wallet you're allowed to carry.
Yeah.
And they take a cut of the cover charge before anyone even hears the music. And if a developer doesn't like those rules, well, they're just left standing out on the sidewalk.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that aligns with the economic concept of platform governance. I mean, Apple doesn't simply compete with developers, right? It governs the very terms under which those developers are allowed to exist.
Which is a huge distinction.
Massive. And the EconWorks researchers, they map out this pipeline super clearly. Before any actual app-to-app competition occurs, before you, the user, ever decide if you like app A better than app B,
right,
the developers have to run this grueling gauntlet of submission rules and access restrictions. They outline this in Figure 1 of the report.
So let's break down that gauntlet a bit.
Yeah.
What kind of demands is the bouncer actually making at the door?
Okay, so first, developers must submit their apps for review, and that means complying with a highly specific, ever-evolving set of App Store guidelines.
Right, the dress code.
Exactly, the dress code. Then, for certain digital transactions, they are mandated to use Apple's proprietary in-app payment system. And crucially, and this is the big one, they have to pay commissions on those digital purchases. And the source analysis emphasizes that failure to comply with these governance mechanisms, it doesn't just result in, a fine or a temporary penalty.
Not a slap on the wrist.
No, it means complete denial of access to the App Store.
Complete denial of access, which, if you're a developer whose target audience uses iPhones. And if we consider the market share of iOS in places like the US, that's what, like half the population?
Yeah, roughly half.
So being denied access to the App Store is functionally a death sentence for your business model. You literally cannot reach your users.
You don't exist to them. And this really highlights why platform governance is such a uniquely powerful force. It shapes developer participation entirely independent of consumer choice.
Right.
You, the listener, you don't get a say in this part of the process at all. The platform policies are filtering the competitive landscape before the downstream competition even has a chance to materialize.
Because the bouncer decides who plays, which means you, the person inside the club, you only get to see the vans that agreed to the bouncer's terms.
Exactly.
Okay, so the bouncer takes a hefty cut at the door.
But wait, let's transition into the club itself for a second. Because if Apple also owns the VIP tables inside, right? Like Apple Music or Apple TV, do they pay their own bouncer? Like, how does a third-party developer survive that math when the club owner is aggressively pushing their own drinks?
Yeah, and this is a critical pivot in the EconWorks analysis.
Right.
We're moving from just governance to actual competitive outcome.
Okay.
The source points out that Apple operates its own apps and services within this exact same ecosystem.
Right.
So they're competing directly in major categories like music streaming, video distribution, payment services, cloud storage.
Basically everything.
Right. So developers who are offering competing services, they have to distribute their apps through a platform controlled by a firm that has massive downstream interests in those exact same markets.
Hold on, though. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure. Because I know people listening might be thinking this exact thing. Apple spent billions developing the iPhone, right? They built the iOS infrastructure totally from scratch.
Right.
It's their hardware, it's their operating system, their massive server farms. I mean, it's their house. So why shouldn't they be allowed to charge a toll at the door and, give their own native apps prime real estate?
And look, it is a totally valid perspective. It's often the core defense in these kinds of debates.
Right.
But the antitrust analysis from EconWorks, it looks at what happens when that quote-unquote house becomes the only viable infrastructure for an entire digital economy. When the referee is also playing in the game, the platform policies start to artificially manipulate the cost structures that are faced by the participating developers.
Okay, walk us through that manipulation. How does the math actually squeeze the developer who's, just trying to build a better music app?
Let's look at the economics of the commission toll. They detail this in Figure 2 of the analysis. Think about physical manufacturing. If you build one more chair, you have to buy more wood, right?
Right, basic physical costs.
Exactly. But in software, the marginal cost to deliver one more digital subscription is practically zero.
Because it's just code being copied.
Right. However, when a platform mandates a 30% cut of every digital transaction, they aren't taxing a developer's cost of production. They're directly siphoning top-line revenue.
Oh, wow.
And that completely destroys the profit margin.
I see. Okay, let's make this concrete for the listener.
Yeah.
So, say a third-party developer builds a fantastic new music streaming app. And to keep the servers running, pay the music licensing fees, which are huge, and pay their staff, they need to make $10 per user.
Exactly. $10 to break even or make a tiny profit.
Yeah.
But because they have to use the platform's mandatory payment system, Apple takes, let's say, $3 of that 10.
Right, the 30%.
Yep. So now the developer only has $7. And they can't pay their licensing fees with $7.
No, the math doesn't work.
Right. But meanwhile, Apple Music also charges the user $10. But because Apple owns the platform, they keep the full $10. There's no internal toll.
Right, they aren't paying themselves a commission.
Yeah.
So the independent developer is forced to raise their price. They have to charge the user, say, $13 or $14 just to clear that same $10 they need to survive.
Yes. Which completely skews the competition for the listener. I mean, if you are looking at two music apps with similar features, and one is $10 while the other is $14...
You're going to pick the $10 one.
Almost certainly. And you make that choice completely unaware that the price difference is not due to a superior business model or better technology, but entirely due to a structural platform tax.
That is wild. The competitor is essentially forced to look inefficient to the consumer.
Exactly.
And if we take that logic a step further, the EconWorks post points out that this doesn't just affect the apps we see on the store. It affects the apps that never even get built.
Yeah, that's a huge point. The source heavily emphasizes how these cost structures affect the viability of market entry. Like, if a team of brilliant engineers runs the numbers and realizes the commission structure makes it mathematically impossible to turn a profit while competing with a native platform app.
They just don't bother.
Right. They simply will not build the app. Capital won't fund it. The entry decision just becomes a hard no.
Which means the market, meaning all of us, loses out on that potential innovation entirely. The apps we never get to see are kind of the hidden casualties of this system.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got the bouncer controlling entry, and we've got the club owner taxing the competition to give their own brand a massive mathematical advantage. Let's move to the next layer of the analysis, which honestly feels like the most restrictive part of all, the invisible wall.
Yeah. You're referring to the communication rules, specifically the anti-steering provisions.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting. Because it's a one thing to charge competitors a toll, right? It's another thing entirely to put a literal gag order on them. We are moving from the financial costs developers face to the deliberate restriction of information that's actually available to users. The platform policies actually prohibit developers from telling you about alternative ways to pay.
Yeah, and the EconWorks researchers mapped out how information flows, or rather, doesn't flow in this ecosystem. They show this in Figure 3. The policies place strict limitations on developer communication regarding alternative purchasing mechanisms.
So what does that mean in practical terms?
Yeah, in practical terms, it means that independent developer we talked about earlier, they could offer you that music subscription for $10 if you buy it directly on their website, bypassing the platform commission entirely.
Okay.
But because of the App Store rules, they are strictly prohibited from putting a link in their app to that website.
Wait, really? They literally cannot put a string of text on the screen that says, hey, go to our website to save $3 a month.
They cannot. They are not allowed. In many cases, they can't even send you an email about it if you signed up through the app.
That's crazy.
They are forced to keep you in the dark.
Which for you, the listener, is just this artificial blind spot. You're using an app, assuming you are seeing the best available price for a service, but there's a structural gag order preventing the creator of that service from showing you a better deal.
And this raises an important point about how healthy markets are supposed to function, right? I mean, an open, competitive market relies absolutely on informed consumers.
Right, you need to know your options.
Exactly. When a platform artificially limits user awareness of competing price options, they are actively manipulating the demand for rival services. The analysis shows this chain reaction clearly. Communication restrictions lead to lowered user awareness, which artificially shifts demand toward the platform's preferred payment system or toward the platform's own native apps.
So the walled garden remains perfectly intact because the user doesn't even know there's a world outside the wall.
Basically, yeah.
If you don't know the cheaper subscription exists on a web browser, you obviously can't choose it. I mean, this feels like it fundamentally alters what we think of when we hear the word competition.
It does.
Usually you imagine companies fighting for your attention with better features or lower prices. Here, the fight is happening behind the scenes over who is even allowed to speak to you.
That is a crucial distinction. And it leads us directly into the ultimate question of consumer harm.
Okay.
Because in traditional century-old monopolization cases like, think, railroads or
Canada Oil.
Yeah.
Right. The classic lens regulators look through is price. Is the monopoly using its power to force consumers to pay higher prices for the core product?
Right.
But the alleged harm in this specific digital context, according to the source, it manifests through completely different mechanisms.
Because Apple isn't necessarily jacking up the price of the App Store itself. I mean, the App Store is technically free for a user to open and browse. So what does this all mean? If the harm isn't a higher price tag on the digital storefront, how is the listener actually being hurt by these behind-the-scenes maneuvers?
Well, the source outlines 4 specific interconnected areas where concerns about inadequate platform governance translate into tangible consumer harm. Let's look at them individually because they kind of build on each other.
Okay, let's do it.
First, it limits developer competition. We saw this with the entry decisions. When the margins are squeezed so tightly by mandatory commissions, fewer developers can afford to even enter the arena.
So the arena is just less crowded to begin with.
Right, which leads right into the second harm. It slows innovation. If all the capital a developer has is going toward paying platform tolls instead of, say, research and development.
And software doesn't get better as fast.
Exactly. The boundary-pushing ideas, they just never get funded because the economics are too hostile.
Wow. Okay, what's the third one?
The third harm is that it drastically reduces consumer choice. And this isn't just about having fewer apps. It's about having a homogenized selection. Oh, like everything kind of looks the same.
Right. If the only business models that can survive the platform's taxation are massive established corporations or, ad-heavy freemium games, the diverse middle ground of creative, independent software simply dies out. The platform's filter determines what makes it to your screen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the fourth harm is the one we touched on with the music app example, right? It constrains pricing alternatives.
Exactly. Because of the communication gag orders and the commission structures, you are often paying inflated prices for digital goods simply to subsidize the platform's toll. And you're doing it without ever being given the option to seek a direct, cheaper relationship with the creator.
So those four harms: limited competition, slowed innovation, reduced choice, and constrained pricing. They really paint a picture of a market that's functioning, but definitely not optimally for the consumer.
No, not at all. But there is one final, incredibly sticky piece to this puzzle that the EconWorks piece brings up.
It's about what happens when you, the user, decide you've had enough and want to leave the ecosystem entirely. The source dives into interoperability and switching costs. They map this out in Figure 4.
Okay, let's translate that. Interoperability, it sounds very technical, but it's really just about whether different systems refuse to play nicely with each other.
Precisely. When a platform places restrictions on interoperability, they are intentionally designing their services so that they do not work seamlessly with third-party hardware or competing ecosystems.
I like to think of this like moving to a new country.
Oh, okay.
Imagine you decide to move, but when you get there, you realize none of your appliances plug into the wall. Your driver's license is completely invalid, and you don't speak a word of the language. The sheer friction of starting over makes you want to just pack up and go back home.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. That friction is entirely intentional. Suppose you've been using Apple's ecosystem for a decade. Your thousands of photos are in iCloud. Your massive curated playlists are in Apple Music. Your passwords are saved in the keychain. Your group chats are all locked into iMessage.
That's literally my entire life.
Right. Your entire digital life is native to that specific environment.
Now, let's say a competitor releases a brand new smartphone. The hardware is stunning, the operating system is super innovative, and you genuinely want to try it.
But if the incumbent platform has limited interoperability, transferring all of that data, recreating those playlists, porting over your digital identity, and maintaining those group chats, it becomes a massive, frustrating headache.
Oh, totally. Like, it might be technically possible to move your life over, but it requires spending a whole weekend just staring at progress bars and losing half your data formatting in the process.
Yeah.
It's so annoying that you just throw your hands up and say, you know what, I'll just buy the new iPhone, it's easier.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is what economists call a switching cost.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a financial cost. You aren't paying a literal exit fee to leave Apple.
Right.
It is a massive cost in time, effort, and frustration. By raising the cost of switching between competing services, the platform actively reinforces user reliance on incumbent apps within the ecosystem. The source clearly identifies this mechanism as creating lock-in.
Lock-in.
Yeah, you are locked in, not because you necessarily believe it's the absolute best product on the market anymore, but because the effort required to leave is simply too high.
The golden handcuffs.
Exactly.
The ecosystem is so incredibly comfortable, so perfectly integrated, and leaving it is so agonizing that you just stay put. And while you stay put, the platform continues to govern the developers, extract the commissions, restrict the communication, constantly reinforcing its own market position. It is a brilliantly designed self-sustaining loop.
It is. It's a closed loop of governance and competitive advantage. And this is exactly why the litigation, the regulatory scrutiny, and analyses like this one from EconWorks are so vital right now.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not just a minor business dispute between massive tech conglomerates over a few percentage points of revenue. It is a fundamental questioning of how digital economies should operate.
Let's pull all of this together because we've covered incredible ground today on a topic that is quite literally playing out right in the palms of our hands.
We really have.
So we started at the absolute beginning, at the App Store's submission gates. We saw how a platform operator acts as the sole bouncer, enforcing stringent rules, guidelines, and mandatory payment systems, holding the ultimate power of denial of access.
Right. Then we examined the downstream effects. We looked at how the platform operator also competes in the very same market and how their commission requirements act as this invisible tax on their rivals.
Like huge tax.
Yeah, a tax that siphons profit margins, forces up consumer prices, and in many cases prevents innovative competitors from even entering the market at all.
And from there, we expose the invisible wall, the anti-steering rules and communication restrictions that artificially manipulate demand. They do this by keeping you, the user, completely in the dark about cheaper alternatives that might exist just outside the platform.
And finally, we looked at the ultimate impact on the consumer. We moved beyond the traditional lens of inflated storefront prices to really understand how platform governance can stifle innovation, homogenize choice, and utilize interoperability restrictions to create massive switching costs.
Which effectively locks you into the ecosystem.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the core philosophical question raised by this entire EconWorks litigation analysis. The big picture, really. Should platform operators be permitted to control not only who gets access to users, but the exact granular terms under which their competitors are allowed to transact with them?
Right.
Is it healthy for the digital economy when the referee is allowed to own a team, write the rule book, and sell the tickets all at the exact same time?
This raises an important question, and it's one that extends far beyond just Apple.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The EconWorks post briefly teases that this dynamic is ecosystem-wide. They mention that Amazon's marketplace ranking algorithms and their allocation of demand raise very similar structural questions.
Oh, that makes sense.
Whenever a single entity controls a vital platform and also competes on it, these exact same concerns regarding governance, visibility, and competition inevitably arise. This is one of the defining economic debates of our current digital era.
It really is. It's about the invisible forces shaping the choices we make every single day. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the learner, with a lingering thought to mull over the next time you unlock your screen. Think about that strict bouncer at the exclusive club we talked about at the beginning. If the vibrant, dynamic landscape of digital competition depends more on the strict rules governing the platform than on the actual quality, utility, and creativity of the software itself, what groundbreaking, life-changing apps are you currently missing out on simply because their creators couldn't afford to play by the gatekeeper's rules?
It's a powerful question. The software we never get the chance to use might just be the biggest hidden cost of all.
Something to think about while you're scrolling today. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the architecture of the app economy. We love unpacking these complex systems with you, and we can't wait to explore the next one. Until then, keep questioning the ecosystem.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of EconWorks. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at EconWorks, thanks for listening.